All right, welcome. Hello and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you all here. We know this is a time of uncertainty and maybe even anxiety for a lot of you out there, for a lot of us too. And so especially as we start to approach a new school year, we know there are a lot of unknowns out there. So we hope that this session will provide a little bit of clarity and encouragement in the form of ideas and tips that hopefully you can take with you to face the year ahead with a little more excitement and maybe a little less trepidation. So my name is Glenna Barlow. I work at the Education Engagement Department here at the Columbia Museum of Art. We're in Columbia, South Carolina. And before I begin, I want to extend our gratitude particularly to Colonial Life. They are our sponsors for this program, and they are real champions of educational initiatives like this one. We really could not have done the past two panel discussions or this one without their enthusiastic support. So we are very grateful to them and other sponsors and members like them who make these educational offerings possible. For those who may not be familiar with us, the Columbia Museum of Art is really dedicated to serving as a resource for educators. I see that as a huge part of what I do every day. And we have our particular mind towards building visual literacy and arts integration across the curriculum. That's a lot of our bread and butter, what we do all the time. But in this moment, we know things are changing rapidly. And particularly in the world of education, there is a lot going on, and we're working to try to meet the needs of teachers in our state and beyond for the present moment. So we've organized this panel discussion as just one of a few that we hope to serve as a resource for teachers. So you can find more information about our other resources at columbiamuseum.org/learn. We've got a full menu of virtual options that I hope that you'll be able to use to infuse art and images in your virtual classrooms throughout the year and beyond. So I hope you'll think of the CMA as a resource as you're moving forward. So now to our topic at hand today. I want to thank you all again for being here, and especially thanks to our panelists who have agreed to speak on these important topics. So I want to begin by saying this is a big topic. We're going to have a lot of questions, I'm sure, that are related to things we'll bring up today. We will attempt to address as many of those as we can, but we understand that, we may not have time or space to talk about everything as in-depth as we'd like to. So if you want to continue this conversation beyond this hour here, we invite you to use the hashtag #FightDigitalFatigue, and you can use that on social media platforms as a way to connect and continue to share resources and ideas. As hopefully you know, we do have a Google Doc with lots of resources that we sent out. We'll continue to add that link into the chat, so feel free to reference that throughout the talk or after. And please drop in your own recommendations as well. Our hope is that whether you've been teaching online for years or you're just getting started, that you'll come away energized and with some new ideas. So I myself am no technology expert. I am here to learn as well. And mostly I'm just here to facilitate. So you will hear a lot more from our panelists than me. Do use the Q&A. I will try to keep an eye on that so we can get those live questions coming through as well. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our three panelists. We have a very impressive group here. They have many years of experience and accolades between them, but rather than take up our full hour singing their praises, I'm going to allow them to briefly introduce themselves and just give you a snapshot of their work as it applies to virtual instruction and technology. So Dr. Sarah Ackerman, would you kick it off for us?
Great, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here joining educators from all over the place. I'm physically located in Indiana. Just moved here yesterday, in fact. I took a new job with Ball State University, where I'm serving as their executive director for teaching innovation. And in that role, I'm working with all faculty members, helping them through this pandemic. But I am an art teacher through and through. I have K through 12 experience teaching here in the States and also in Zurich, Switzerland. I had a great privilege of working at a couple of international schools there. And I've done the low tech, I've done the high tech, and everything in between. So I'm coming to you with a passion for art education and also a passion for technology. And I'm hoping I can give you some good strategies to not just survive, but thrive this fall.
Great, thank you. All right, and I'll turn it to Yujan Anderson now.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here as well. And like she just mentioned, my name is Yujan Anderson, and I am the District Technology Director for Troy City Schools in Troy, Alabama. I have been the tech director for almost 10 years now, and I am pretty excited to be here. And basically, my role includes making sure that our students and teachers have the technology that they need. And in this time of remote learning and for the unknown, hopefully I can help our teachers as well as those who are on this panel with information of how we could include educational technology and the resources that they need for our student learning.
Great, thank you. We're happy to have an administrator among our midst. All right, and Jennifer Steiner is joining us, hometown from South Carolina. So
yeah, so I'm not too far from Glenna, just up the road. So I'm currently an assistant principal at Gilbert High School, which is in Lexington 1, not too far from Columbia. Before that, I was a digital learning coach at a high school. And so that our goal was to help teachers integrate technology in an impactful way. So I've had a lot of experience helping teachers use technology in a way that's meaningful for learning, not just to have a flashy tool in their utility belt. So, but I've been here in the South for, this is my 14th year in education down here. So we've seen a lot of cool things.
Great. Well, thank you all again so much for being here. We have a lot of really important questions, so we're going to get right to it. I'm going to jump in, and we're going to use this to kind of frame our discussion so we can show you some images as well. But just to kick us off, we wanted to start thinking broadly about those basic nuts and bolts kind of things you need to know. So platforms, apps, hardware, software. What have you found that works best for your students? We said besides Zoom because clearly everyone here is already familiar with Zoom at least a little bit, but what other platforms have been really successful in your experience? Jennifer, can you start us off on that topic?
I sure can. So our district's the Schoology district. So that's what we use as our LMS, our learning management system. And so if you're fortunate to have a district LMS, then that's going to be the best place for you to start. The more that you can integrate in that one place is really going to help your teachers stay focused. It's going to help your students and your parents stay focused and know where to go to get the information they need. And so, for us, Schoology is all encompassing for that. And then if you don't have a license like that, you can do Google Classroom. Seesaw is actually a really good free LMS that you can use. I see that a lot more with some of the younger grade levels. And it allows you to do some like whiteboard interactions. I used to have some students at my school work with students at a different high school in the district because they could both be in that same seesaw and have discussions around, for that particular one, it was a Spanish class. So they were having dialogue with students at other schools. So there are definitely some free LMSs, and I think that's going to be helpful to at least ground your work somewhere in an LMS. And then from there, there's tons of apps out there, tons of software. I'm highlighting Padlet, so shout out to Allison Hendricks. She's one of our art teachers here, and she's amazing. And this particular piece is her AP art students displaying their work, and I had to kind of shrink it down so you don't see names and stuff. But this was a way for the kids to post their pieces, and then they actually posted PDFs about their thinking around these pieces. And this was shared with their classmates, this was shared with our school staff, and so we were able to go in and comment on their work and ask questions about their work and really still interact with them. So Padlet's really a great software and you can just include that link in the LMS that you're already using to get kids to engage. And you can post videos to Padlet, you can post obviously some images, or you can type directly into it. So that's a great platform. And then Flipgrid has gotten some hype too, and I think that's an important one. When you want a quick reflection, you don't want students to have to spend a lot of time writing. Maybe you want their reaction in real time. Like our occupational program used Flipgrid with their students because some of these students aren't going to be able to put some of that in writing the way that they could just say it. And and we'll talk about it a little bit later too, but that is also a good way to still see faces. You get to still see your kids, the kids get to still see you. As an administrator, I would pop into some of their flip grids, and I got to see the kids when the kids were at school. So that was a pretty cool platform to use. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks. Well, I kind of, when I looked at this question, my focus was on, okay, folks want to do video recording, but maybe they don't have access to Zoom. Here at our university, we're just making the transition to Zoom. So we've had faculty using all sorts of different video recording and video sharing platforms. These are just a couple that I've used, and I'll add to the list Soapbox by Wistia. These are free video software offerings, and for the most part, as I'll talk about a little bit with some examples of my own course development, when it comes to video, a lot of the video that I'm doing is me, myself, and I. It's me creating mini lectures, mini demonstrations, because when it comes to video, something else that I'm really concerned about, and you probably are too if you're in the K-12 realm, is student safety too. I was watching very closely the publications about Zoom bombers and whatnot, and I think they've closed the loop on a lot of those things. But the more you can have your students share within the safety of an LMS, learning management system like Google Classroom or Canvas or Schoology. Jennifer, I have experience with Schoology as well. That's really good to protect your students. And some students, they don't want to be on video because they don't want themselves to be on video or their backgrounds. So these are the things that I use to videotape myself, and they're free and pretty easy to use.
All right. Yushan, did you want to add anything to that?
I think they pretty much said everything. Those are all great resources, and so I would just like to also recommend, if you don't have access to Zoom, you can always use Google Meet, which is the Google platform for video conferencing. And so I think for the most part, the ones that they mentioned are also highly recommended digital tools that I recommend as Tech Director that we use in our school system as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's always great to think about access points. So thank you all for thinking about, free options as well as paid. All right, and then some of the scary things when we think about technology is something's going to go wrong, or I'm not going to be able to fix it. So I just wanted to take a moment to think about, what are those tech snafus that you've run into, or what are the ones you see other teachers falling prey to, and how can we try to avoid those and make things work as seamlessly as possible?
So I would suggest really easing into any of the pieces that you're going to use. So as you saw with the Padlet piece, that was beautiful work for her art students, but she's not going to tell them the first time she introduces Padlet, I need you to upload these 6 things, I need you to comment on it, I need you to add this critical analysis at the end. You're gonna want to use different types of software, different types of tools. Get their feet wet in an entry level way. So you might introduce something like Padlet, and then, all right, just post something positive that happened to you this week. And so then their focus can be on like learning the quirks around the tool for that moment. And then you're also getting that kind of building that community a little bit too. It's not just post anything, but have a little bit of intention behind it. But that way, when you do need them to do some more rigorous work through that tool, they're not focusing all on the tool at that point. They're getting to focus on the learning and the instruction. So definitely easing in and keeping it to a minimal. I mean, it's easy to see this. Here's a flip grid, and then I'm going to combine it with this Padlet, and then I'm going to use this virtual lab. And you don't want your kids to have to be going to 17 places to do one thing. And so sometimes you'll use a tool that's a little less flashy because it's going to work within that system. So you might have software that has a better discussion board feature than Schoology. But if my kids are already doing something in Schoology, instead of having them reroute to this just because it has a voting feature on it, may not be worth it if it's really going to distract them from the heart of the learning. So easing it in, not all the tools at once. And I think going back to like, what's the heart of your instruction? So what are you trying to do? What are you trying to learn with this piece, instead of, I've seen this really cool thing on Twitter and I want to use it, so how do I work it in? So it's about good teaching.
Yeah, keep it simple. Good advice always. And Sarah, did you want to follow up on that as well?
Yeah, I think for me, when I'm working with faculty, helping them prepare for fall, and Jennifer, I can really relate to what you said. Emphasizing simplicity is often better in this case, and a lot of folks, I find, they're really interested in, for example, synchronous teaching. You know, they want to be able to give everything to their students while they're in their classroom. So if they're working with some students in the physical classroom, they want to teach those students, but while also being on video for students that might be at home. And there's just so many technical struggles that can happen when you're balancing all of these things, all of these tech tools, devices, logins, and you're trying to monitor all of these different things, all while doing good teaching practice. And it's really, really challenging. So what I find to avoid all of that, I really fall back on the flipped instruction model, where if I'm seeing my students face to face, I use that time for critical conversations, critique, demonstrations, things that are personalized to that group. And then I use my LMS, learning management system, to put all that other information. So if I have mini lectures or mini demos that all of my students need to see, if I have outside videos, because it's not just my face I want them to see, I want them to get a lot of different perspectives. I use that learning management system more so now because of the circumstances we're living in, but I use it as an extension of my actual classroom space. So this is a little preview into a photo course that I helped build for the Art of Education, where I came from before Ball State University. And the next slide, actually, it kind of previews how I go about building my courses in the LMS to be really super straightforward, easy for students and parents and family members if they're supporting their students at home to navigate through course content, so that it's really streamlined and we avoid those technical snafus. The next slide, I have two more slides with kind of a little image into what these modules look like. And again, I'm setting up my LMS whether I'm teaching face-to-face or strictly digital, because I see it as a tool, I see it as an extension, and I'm really super basic with how I lay things out, because I don't know if my student is looking at the content just themselves, if they're getting a parent or an older sibling to help them through this content as well. I want it to be so straightforward that they don't have any question of where they need to go when. So this is from a photo course. The next slide is from a university level course, actually, for art teachers. And you can see, because I think one of the questions was, how do you differentiate between elementary students and university students? Well, I don't really differentiate too much when it comes to laying the content out, because in my mind, simplicity is best. If a first grader is going to get confused by me, a university student is going to get confused. What I want them to do is focus on the important thing, which is learning and creating.
Really important reminders. Just kind of simplify and keep things as clear as possible. So thank you for laying that out. All right, this is a question we've touched on a little bit in some of our past discussions, but I think it's a really important topic, and especially as we go into the start of a new year, rather than moving to a virtual platform in the middle of the year when you already knew your students pretty well. How do you build and maintain and really sustain a sense of community among your classes and between your students? Because there's that extra dimension of not being physically together. So how do you, overcome that? And Sarah, do you want to start us off on that?
Sure. Well, I know you have just a little screenshot, Glenna, of one of my courses on the next slide. And this is actually a video that I created right before the pandemic hit. And it was one of my video updates for my online students. I was in Switzerland, so I was coming in front of the art museum, the Kunsthaus in Switzerland. And I share this image because I try to humanize myself as much as possible, especially if it's strictly an online class that I'm teaching. Because I've learned that as much as I miss engaging with my students face-to-face, surprisingly, they start to miss me too. Maybe not so much at the beginning, but after a while, they miss the nuances. And so in my classes, while it's a mixture of videos of me and other content area specialists, I make it a point every week to create a video update. And they're unique every single week. I run through my students' responses. I highlight really interesting pieces that they're working on. I highlight progress. I share things that are going on around me. So in this case, I was telling them, guys, I made it to the Kunsthaus. I'm about to go inside. I can't wait to share some of my learning, to kind of humanize myself along the way. And then that in turn invites the opposite. So whether it's in the actual update that I post or in a discussion board, students, they see me doing these sorts of things and they start to open up. We're using Canvas, and students can create videos straight there in Canvas, upload them to a discussion board. But I'll have you click to the next slide, Glenna, and I'm really excited to see my friend, Ms. Kincaid, in the chat. So I know she's here. She's one of the fellow leaders of the online art teachers group, and I wanted to highlight her because she's doing really wonderful things to humanize with her class. If you click to the next slide, Glenna, you can see this is a Holly's post in the online Facebook group. And I'm a Bitmoji fanatic, but there's been some really good conversation among folks that yes, the Bitmojis are good and great and fun, but students also really want to see our actual faces. So what Holly's done here is she's put her face out there for her students to see and humanize with. Hi, Holly.
That's so important, I think, to model the behavior that you want to see in so many ways. That seems to come up again and again. If you want them to open up, you open up first. Jennifer, can you speak to what the experience is like at your school as well?
So we're an EL education school, so we have crew, and that really is about building community and checking with our students and being advocates for those students. And so we had a lot of intentionality around connecting with our kids. So some of the things that our crew leaders would do would be just host little, at first it was Google Hangouts and then it became Zoom because we're now Zoomy, but where kids could just kind of drop in and our teachers would share that with administrators. So I could just click on a link and drop in and I see these kids in their homes, and sometimes you can do an academic check-in. So where are you struggling? Like, where do you need help? Like, do you need help, like technological help, or do you need some assistance with your paper? And so it is like an academic check-in, but it is a very social, emotional check-in. And I think something really cool that came out of this is like our teachers got to see inside of our kids' homes, and you just learned so much more about your kids when you look inside of their homes, and you see how they interact with whatever it is around them, and it tells you a little bit more about those kids. You get to connect a little bit more. And then for the kids who didn't opt to participate, then you have a small list of kids that you're personally reaching out to, and you're reaching out to those families, and like there's a lot of things that we do not love about school closure, but it allowed for an opportunity for teachers to have more personal, individualized relationships and know some of our kids a little bit better, because when this child did not participate, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I need to call this child, I need to figure out what's going on. And you kind of had a little bit more space or a little bit more mental capacity to do that when you didn't have some of the distractions that you have when you have the room full of kids. But it's a really important time to build that community and check in with those kids, because we're all going through a lot, and we're all going to continue to go through a lot. And so it's not just about community with your kids, it's also about community with your colleagues too.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And, you know, as we start off the year, I think it's going to be so important to build that time in. You know, even if you're not a school that has that type of model, I think, you know, hopefully you can make space for those kind of moments in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, sorry, one more thing I want to add is our librarian had a book study that she sent out to the kids, and our book club. And so like on 30-minute Zoom or Google Hangout on Fridays, and these just kids randomly would come in, and someone's playing a guitar and someone's reading to the group, and they wanted a reason to connect. And so sometimes it's they wanted any reason to connect.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. All right. One question that we got a whole lot, understandably, is how can we as educators overcome some of these limitations that sometimes seem bigger than us, or, you know, they seem too hard to tackle? Sometimes that means just dealing with inequity, whether that's access to infrastructure or you know, not having the bandwidth to use, or not having the devices. How can we, at least in some small way, try to tackle those challenges? And I'm going to ask you, John, to start on that one.
Yes, and this is a very challenging question because I know there's only so much that you can do as a teacher as it relates to making certain that all of your students have access to what they need. And so what I would like to mention about this is, if you could try your best to make certain that your administrators are aware of what your shortcomings are in your particular classroom. If you don't have enough technology, if you don't have, some of your students do not have the Wi-Fi access at home, that if you could help us. And speaking from the district office personnel, I know that at times we try our best to give access based on our budgets and what we can, but sometimes we may do this on our own, thinking that we know what you all may need as teachers. And so it's best that if teachers could reach out to possibly their administrators and let them know, hey, this is what we need in our classrooms to help us function better. And then that way we could properly plan for what's needed as far as infrastructure, devices, and just any type of access that students would need.
Yeah, it's so important. Speaking up on a school level, and also, you know, sometimes that means speaking up on a political level too. So yeah, thank you for reminding us about just the importance of communicating what those needs are.
Yes, that's very key.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer, can you speak to that as well, in terms of just kind of what that might look like on a smaller scale?
So we had a lot of kids who our students are one-to-one with devices. So every one of our high school students has a MacBook that we give them. So the physical device is not the issue as much as having internet access at home. Some of the kids, they only have internet access when they come to school. But what we found out is a lot of our students do have access to smartphones, and they might have access to hotspots, but you can't do everything on your smartphone that you can do on your MacBook. And so that doesn't mean that you stop doing things for all your students, but it does mean that you might have to differentiate some activities for particular students that are going to have trouble doing that through a cell phone. So some of these kids might be, you know, drawing their outline for their like a paper draft. They might physically write out their outline on paper and take a picture of it and send it to you. Because I mean, almost all of our kids at least had a cell phone in the house that had some kind of data. So finding some workarounds and going back to, like, what's the point of this activity? Like, what kind of learning is supposed to be happening here? and what can I do in a different platform to still see that learning? And it doesn't have to be equal, it needs to be equitable. So some of these kids can tell you over the phone something that they've learned without it being a formal submission into a Dropbox somewhere that looks like the rest of your class. So kind of adjusting what you'll accept to kind of meet some of those technology needs. Not everything has to be replicated exactly. I mean, we had teachers buying jump drives, and that's something that, I mean, we had a teacher come up to school and they were like, I have a jump drive that I put everything on it because the kid doesn't have internet. So shout out to my teachers. And that's definitely something, had I realized they were going to buy, we could have, jump drives are cheap. So that's something that we could have helped them buy too. And that kind of goes back to what you, John, was saying about letting people know so that we can help advocate for those kids.
Great reminders there. Thank you for addressing some of those, reminders just to be, understanding and to, be flexible, which every educator is, I know. So just to broaden what we consider when we're thinking about assessment and, what assignments might look like. And I'll add in too that I'm starting to see, and maybe some of you are too, libraries and other places popping up where you can, maybe rent or check out a hotspot. So just take a look and see what might be available in your communities that could be a resource for your students too. All right, so we wanted to touch also on this notion of differentiating. And so that might be, what does differentiation look like in different technologies, but it also sometimes comes down to what platforms or what apps or services are going to work best for different ages. So John, can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so when we think about this and how to try our best to differentiate instruction for our different age groups, of course, I would like to talk about this on the education technology side of the digital tools that are being used. And what I like to recommend to teachers is to make certain that the digital tools that you are using, they are suitable for your particular age group. And so I know that Dr. Sarah and Jennifer both mentioned all sorts of tools to use earlier, as far as Seesaw and the different tools that you can use, but just make certain that it applies to that particular age. So for instance, when we do professional development in our district, we make certain that we have a list to let you know how does this apply to your particular age group. So for instance, if you're going to look at Seesaw and Padlet, and we may have that over there in elementary to middle school versus understanding Zoom and Google Meet and Flipgrid, we're more so looking at our middle school to high school level. So that's where I would first make my recommendation on differentiating the instruction with your various audiences.
Thank you so much. I think that's helpful. Just to clarify, because I know there are definitely a lot of first-year teachers out there or teachers who are just brand new to this whole notion of online instruction. So sometimes just knowing what apps and platforms are best is really helpful in getting started. And then another kind of more specific tech question as well, and I'm probably calling you, John, as well for this, but just, since you kind of are Google Classroom expert, are there any tricks or tips that you've learned? What advice would you give folks who are using, because since Google Classroom does seem to be a really popular platform, it's pretty accessible, what are some tips you've come across to make it work as smoothly as possible?
Yeah, so to try to make it work as smoothly as possible, I recommend that teachers be as organized as possible in Google Classroom. And what I mean by being organized is that you have to understand that because we are in this remote learning world now, that most of your students will probably receive 10 to 12 Google Classroom assignments or whatnot. And so we try to tell our teachers, be as detailed as possible in the description. So instead of having a fourth period as the title of your Google Classroom, if you could put information in there like the teacher name, what subject you're teaching, the content, that way that could kind of help the student out. And then just the organization, we always mention in the classwork section in Google Classroom that you want to organize everything by topics. And then from your topics, you will add your material And then from your material, you would add your assignments. I think sometimes teachers get so excited when they get into Google Classroom that they instantly create assignments. And then it's a assignment on top of assignment on top of assignment. And then you kind of forget, okay, this is how the students are looking at this information. They're getting notifications, all sorts of emails. So we try to show them how to, of course, slow down, keep it simple, create your topics, add your material, and then go ahead and add your assignments. And then also with that being said, there is a streaming section that your students are going to see first. Instead of bombarding that with notifications from classwork and the information that you're going to give them, that we recommend that you turn that notification off. So that the only thing that they would see in stream would be any announcement that you want to make for that particular classroom.
Great tips. Thank you so much. And I think it's important to remember the user. You know, we sometimes get wrapped up in the content that we're developing, but it's always helpful to remember what's it going to look like for the student in this case who's using this. Thank you. All right, and going right along with that notion of instruction and thinking about how our students are learning, how can we as educators still hope to engage students and tap into their creativity, accommodate for different learning styles or divergent thinking, and how does that kind of get infused into this work even though we're on this different platform? Sarah, can you start us off with that topic?
Well, and Glenda, this is a loaded question, thinking about all the questions that we've been answering leading up to this in terms of thinking through different issues with accessibility, kids having different access levels to technology. And I think if there were a group to tackle all of the worries of the world, it would be this group, this audience members, this group of creative thinkers. And what's exciting to me in this moment is that we have an opportunity to really kind of show the world how it can be done, responding to a whole host of issues and concerns, but creatively. I have students that they are engaging with their class strictly from a phone, and it might not be their own phone. And I have some students that aren't accessing, they don't even have a phone, so they have to log in via other means. And so when I'm thinking about how am I going to keep my students being creative, how am I going to keep my students asking questions, I really lean into my roots with choice-based instruction, with maker instruction. And the next slide is just a screenshot from Project Zero. If you don't have that website bookmarked, bookmark it and go often, because they continue to add resources for folks that I think would be really helpful, specifically for art teachers. I make a lot of choice boards for my students in the here and now that I post to my LMS, but I can also post over social media. I can also post on a school website. So students can access these choice boards wherever they are, whatever technology they have accessible. But then as I build the choice boards, I think about all of the different materials that students might or may not have access to, all of the technology they may or may not have access to. And by building a choice board, I can really create a continuum of high-tech learning opportunities, low-tech learning opportunities, and I pull a lot of my ideas from Project Zero. But other things that I noticed in the chat, there was a question, and I think it's related, from Rachel, who's asking about how do you get students to engage with one another. And in my next slide, you'll see a little bit of my Bitmoji character. A lot of my students, as they're working through their choice boards and they're working through their unique learning opportunities, they create these little galleries. And then we use VoiceThread. VoiceThread is a wonderful tool for engaging students and getting them talking through their divergent thinking and their studio habits. I will create a basic voice thread, and then students drop in either one image or a gallery image like this. And then students can get in there and talk about each other's artwork. They can do voice, they can do video, they can do text comments. That's one way that students are engaging with one another in dynamic ways. But if you can embed as much choice and maker philosophies in your curriculum, the better.
That's
Okay.
so true. And I think what's important to remember too is, and what goes right along with that is maker culture and STEAM learning and design thinking, all of that kind of inherently brings in creativity. It inherently brings in choice and flexibility with materials and just adapting to what you have. So it kind of answers a lot of those concerns. So yeah, thank you for bringing up.
And just to
Sorry.
clarify, that was Harvard's Project Zero, Laura. So if you Google Project Zero, you'll get their amazing website. And they offer courses and other things that you can pay for, but they have a lot of free resources as well.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry. That is the hard part about being in a virtual environment. It's hard to jump in sometimes, but we're learning. I just wanted to add, because I know Sarah mentioned Rachel's question and was addressing that, and just kind of bringing it back to think about what you're asking the kids to do and if the purpose is going to engage them. And so technology by definition is just a tool to do these things, but are you asking them to interact for the sake of interacting? Or are you giving them a reason where they actually need to work together? Or are you giving them something that's actually going to make them want to step up and say, like, no, that's not true, that's not what I believe? And so there's plenty of controversy in the art field where you can post stuff that is going to make those kids have some emotion around that, and it's going to cause them to want to put their voice out there. So it doesn't have to be a fancy app or a fancy tool. I mean, you see how much people want to raise their voices on Facebook, and that's not a fancy art tool, but it's about like the heart of it. Like, how do you want them to engage? What are you doing to make them want to engage in that? And that kind of goes back to, like, this foundational, this good, effective instructional pieces for any environment.
Absolutely. Really important to remember, I think. So thank you so much. Okay. So thinking about art instruction specifically, since we're an art museum, we know we've got some art teachers out there. Sarah, I'm going to pick on you again here, but are there tips that you have for art instruction specifically? So things like critiquing have come up, or just things that we typically think of as being very hands-on and physical. How does that look in the virtual realm?
Sure, and I'll kick off because Laura posed a really provocative question in our chat about the title of today's panel conversation being Fighting Fatigue with Digital Engagement. And it's related to my response here because when all of this when the pandemic first hit, everyone was overwhelmed, myself included, in terms of like, how do I restructure everything for remote delivery? And the way I fought my own fatigue was leaning into the work of other folks, and specifically museums. So museums like Glenna's and all others, they really jumped into action, creating resources and digital tools and even lesson plans and strategies that I could use in my own classroom, and I could mentor my art educators to use as well. So a lot of my course building, it is a lot of me, but it's a lot of everyone else. And we're in a situation where I feel like everyone's sharing a lot of love, especially in that online art teachers group. The way I fight fatigue is by leaning on you all as partners in curriculum development. So the next couple of slides, these are just some of the assignments from my current students that are creating their own dream art museums. My students in my classes, they make art, they think about where their art would live. Usually we would put together an actual physical gallery, but that's a little bit harder right now. And so I have students that are creating digital spaces in Kunst Matrix, which has a free membership offering. You can create these digital gallery spaces, but I have students creating these renderings of what their dream museums would look like on the inside and out. And so the idea in this particular course is that they think about just about every element of the looking and viewing and talking about art piece, including where these things live. And so at the next slide, other things that I do, if you don't follow the art class curator, this is another person, another group that you can lean in on to help fight fatigue. They're offering so much in the here and now, including this free, I turned it into a Google slide deck, but it's a deck of cards that if you're in the physical classroom, you could print it out and give these questions, a deck of cards for students to think and reflect upon artwork. I made it into a Google slide deck. I've also made it into a VoiceThread deck. And I believe our resource, which will be shared with you, has links to all of these things to get students looking at talking about their artwork, the artwork of their peers, historical and contemporary works that we bring into our virtual classrooms. It's a great conversation starter. Next slide, I believe, is an example of one of the VoiceThread critiques. This is just the initial contribution from the student. They posted their, this was part of a whole class VoiceThread deck. So every student had their own slide, they posted their artwork, and then students could come in and leave a voice comment, a video comment, or just a text comment. And this will never completely replace that face-to-face critique experience. But if we're forced to continue in a remote or a combination of face-to-face and remote, it's a good step forward. And I think we have another slide. And I just want to, this is another, looping back on the fatigue piece. There was a point during the pandemic where I got really, really sad. I don't know about you. I was really, really sad because I wasn't seeing my students. I wasn't seeing my family, my friends. And one thing that I did for myself, and then I ended up introducing it to my students, was just some fun tidbits. I've linked, this is an article of, I think it's a couple who created a gerbil museum. And you can see the actual photographs with the actual animals reading or looking at the artwork in this little museum. And I have a couple other resources in the slide deck as well. These are things that I bring to my students. And I say, we're creating artwork for ourselves and for our families, but other creatures can look at and appreciate art. And it gives them a different perspective, but it also kind of lightens the load a little bit and helps with that fatigue. And then the next slide is another fun thing that I've done with students as they're creating their virtual displays, whether it's in Kuntz Matrix or a Google slide deck, or even making a video where they've literally hung their artwork on the walls in the hallway or on the refrigerator and they're giving us a video tour. I will often give different roles to the viewers, the student viewers in the room, to be kind of the docents, if you will, or the digital media experts. And I'll use this gentleman. He's head of security at a cowboy museum. And I know it's probably all very well staged, but he's running the social media for the museum during the pandemic. And that's one of the roles that I give students. So as they're running through a peer's digital museum, they act as the social media advertising what it is that they're seeing, what the artwork means to them. So I think having fun with your students, having fun with your curriculum has helped me fight fatigue and continue to love what I do.
Thank you. I love that layer of authenticity and, kind of thinking about those different roles, whether it's in museums or kind of, bringing those into the classroom setting, and just the importance of having fun and, lightening things up for your students because they're dealing with a lot, just like all of us. So thank you for those reminders. All right, we've gotten some other questions about kind of more logistical aspects of what this new, digital reality looks like. One of them is about grading. I know a lot of you, particularly at higher levels, have many, many students that you're responsible for grading. So how have you been able to, again, fight fatigue and really tackle the high volume and just the relentlessness of grading on this new digital kind of platform? Jennifer, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure. And I kind of mentioned this before, but if you try to spend all your time completely replicating everything that's going on in the classroom, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to wear your students out. You do not need to look at virtual learning as like, I normally have 75-minute class, so I need to give them 75 minutes of virtual learning, because that's hard. It's a different environment. You're not having to deal with some of the things you're normally dealing with in the classroom. So really ask yourself, like, what is the point of this activity? What's the point of this assignment, and how can I streamline that? It doesn't need to be, we all have our things that we love. Like, this is my favorite assignment. I love when the kids do this. But you're not trying to completely replicate everything you're doing in your classroom, because you do have some of those more personal moments where you can engage individually with students, and you could probably learn a lot more about what they know or what they don't know in a 2 or 3 minute conversation than you could by reading a bunch of essays. So think back about, like, what do I really want to know from this kid? And it doesn't have to be that traditional assessment like it usually is. I mean, in art, teachers, you're so great usually of giving feedback the entire time. So anytime you're using a platform where you can see some of their work and some of their thinking in real time, then you're just given like some snippets of formative feedback along the way, and it doesn't have to be something very, very formal. And I think part of that question was, how do you get that feedback when only 25% of your kids submit the work? So that is a little harder. These kids aren't in arm's reach, so we can't physically intimidate them as much as we feel like we can in the classroom. But kids are more likely to engage in something that they find relevant and meaningful. And so if it is something to fill the time and you're just trying to check this off the box, kids know that. And so, like, you'd rather them do a very shorter activity that is very meaningful, and they're going to do that, than this long, complex activity just for the sake of saying you had 3 formative grades and a summative grade at the end of it. So, I mean, this is still a tough one. Grading has been a challenge since the beginning of education, but don't try to replicate everything that you're doing in the classroom.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, just thinking about what's going to be relevant to students and just being smart about adapting. If there's a lesson that's just not going to work online, then, so be it. But you may also come across some new lessons that you love and that, maybe become future favorites. Sarah, did you want to add anything on this topic as well?
Oh, sure. Well, when you posed this question, this did take me back to maybe my first couple of years teaching high school photo. And my colleagues who were next door neighbors who were teaching like painting and sculpture and ceramics, they were always jealous of me when I went home with my nice, neat stack of student photographs. And they're like, we could never do that. You can never take all of your sculptures home to grade, nor do you want to, right? Work-life balance. But one of the things that I really liked about maybe shifting to digital sooner than the pandemic was, I could take my grading anywhere with my computer, but it still doesn't address just the sheer volume of it at times. And so with the next slide, Glenna, when my students turn things in, whether it's a face-to-face class or we're in this weird online hybrid approach, I have them turn things in through our LMS. I'm using Canvas, but I have them turn in their assignments via discussion board. So I'm not having them submit this secret folder that only I will see. I have them submit their work, pose a picture or a video, along with some written pieces if it's age appropriate, in the discussion board. And what that does is it kind of ups the ante for students. One, because they know I'm going to see it, but also their peers are going to see it. And it also helps with the feedback piece. So I give my students some guidance as I expect them to provide peer feedback. Again, you have to work with an age group that would do this well, but I give them guidance. And so then it's their peers that are giving them maybe some of the heftier feedback, and I'm there monitoring. This is helpful when there's really big classes and I really want to dive deeper into different elements of the grading, but it helps students feel like they're getting adequate attention because other people are looking at the work. But as I mentioned, this isn't always age appropriate. This is good for like middle school up, and my elementary students, it's either they're submitting over VoiceThread, or in the next slide, when I was working with early elementary, I really enjoy Class Dojo. That helped me kind of keep tabs on my informal formative assessment pieces. And so find strategies that feel good for you. But the good thing about using a platform like this, or particularly an LMS, is that student safety is a huge concern. I know for me, and probably for many of you.
Thank you. I think those are really good takeaways. I think especially for older students, that accountability layer, building that in is going to be important if you're trying to get a good return on your assignments. So some really great reminders. And then also always with a mind to differentiation for different groups, of course. Which leads us right into this next question, which is all about differentiating and making adaptations. So what are some topics or ideas you've come across that have been helpful in making adaptations or accommodations for students who have special needs? And I know those, of course, can run the gamut, but we're thinking about students with low vision, or maybe who have low mobility, or just whatever those challenges might be. Have you come across ways to make those adaptations even on a virtual level? And Sarah, I think I'll turn it to you for this, if that's all right.
Well, this has been a really big conversation, particularly at Ball State, where I am now, because faculty, they're realizing, okay, we really need to address the needs of all of our students. And sometimes that's easier to do in person rather than over online. And now we're living in this Zoom, YouTube kind of world. And YouTube you can use automatic captions, but it's not always absolutely accurate. If you're in a situation where you're having to create captions because you have a student that needs those, I've used tools like Panopto, where it's a combination of Panopto will automatically transcribe, but then you can go in and make little corrections, which I have often had to do if, I say a French artist's name and the caption is spelled totally wrong. I can go in and adjust that. So I think just having a really good conversation with your administration, seeing what are the specific needs of your students. Do you have some visual impairments, hearing impairments? What are some things that they can do to support you in maybe getting access to captioning software that's going to be accurate? Because I know another thing that some schools are running into is lawsuits if things aren't absolutely 100% accurate. So I think it's worth the conversation with your administration.
And that really goes back to you, John's point about just being vocal and open with your administrators, and just letting them know what your needs are and what your students' needs are. So I think that's a really important point always. And I'm glad you mentioned some of the resources that are available. We have included a few of those in our Google Doc that we shared with you. So we've got, a lot of them are around low vision, because we're focused so much on seeing and really connecting that way. So of course we're needing to supplement those visual elements. So we do have a few tools out there in terms of descriptions. So how to craft those, some that are already out there. There's some museums that already have wonderful resources in that department. So do take a look at the Google Doc. If you have other recommendations, please feel free to drop those in as well. This is just an ongoing resource for all of you, truly. So, so if you come across other resources, websites, whatever, that's been helpful in your teaching, please feel free to share those as well. But yeah, we do want to be mindful of our all of our learners and their different challenges that each of them are facing. And we're all facing a lot of challenges on our own these days. So I thought we might end by thinking about some of the bright spots and what are those, maybe, no one anticipated this pandemic, no one's particularly happy about it, the situation that we're all in, but maybe from this new moment we will come out better in some ways. Maybe we're going to learn some new things. Maybe there are some points of light or hopefulness. So I wanted us to kind of wrap up by thinking about what are maybe some of those positives that might come out of this really difficult moment. So I'm going to turn it to you, Sarah, and we'll start there.
Thank you, Glenna. Well, I've dropped it occasionally during my segments, but the Online Art Teachers K-12 Facebook group, I think we're over 15,000. I have to look, but that has been such a pleasure for me to help support, but also to refuel myself. The conversations, when you can find a group like that, the conversations are often hard, they're often honest, and that's important to have those hard conversations, but speckled in between has been celebrations and triumphs, and people being really vocal about what's working for them. And that has really helped fuel me during all of this. And I look forward to continuing to contribute, but also even when we get back to a sense of normal, continuing to lean on that group. We're in a place now in art education specifically where I haven't seen this kind of outpouring and sharing of resources in a very long time. And I say, let's keep that love flowing.
Great. Yeah, that's so true. I think educators are so great in that they all have this naturally collaborative and generous spirit. Of course, you're giving of yourselves all the time, but you're so willing to share with one another because you know that when someone else's work improves, everybody wins. So I love to see that kind of support. John, I'm going to throw it to you next.
Yes, I would like to just piggyback off of what she just mentioned as far as those community efforts, especially in social media, that there are all sorts of Facebook groups out there, Twitter chats, like you just mentioned, that you can become a part of. And so I've seen so many from Google to Schoology to just have teacher conversations, and just going back to the topic of trying to battle that fatigue. I think this would be the preparation. And so just being able to understand that there are other people out there that are having the same concerns, the same challenges, the same issues that everyone is having, that if you can get a part of these groups. And one more thing I would like to mention about just a bright spot is I've seen the community effort of getting involved, just speaking on universities reaching out to K-12 and K-12 reaching out to universities. And now we're starting to work, really work together about this situation. And so that's what I've seen as far as the bright spots. And I think if we could continue this, even after this, I think that we will all be okay.
Yeah, collaboration is key, right?
Yes.
And Jennifer, to you now.
I think one of the brightest spots is just how much our teachers and our faculty members have connected with students on an individual level. The school day can get crazy and it's very busy, and you're just trying to do everything efficiently. And I think school closure caused us to slow down, and it caused us to focus on what really matters and love on our kids and connect to our kids. So I saw a lot of those individual connections, which I thought was really great. And I think as educators, we took a step back and kind of threw out some of the stuff that probably was a little less meaningful, and we've always just done it because it was the thing that we always did, and we're starting to question, like, is that the most essential thing for this moment? And I think it's giving our kids higher quality engagements. So.
Absolutely. That's so important to remember. I mean, the students are why we all do what we do, right? So thank you for that reminder. All right, well, before we sign off today, I did want to remind everyone that we've got an email that went out to you. We'll send out another one that will have a brief survey along with our Google Doc and lots of other resources, but we'd love to get your feedback on this session, and that will help us to shape future offerings that we hope to be able to give you as well. So we will drop that link to you shortly. And I just wanted to end by offering up our heartfelt thanks and our gratitude for each of our panelists for joining us and sharing their expertise and their time with us today. So you, John, Jennifer, Sarah, thank you all so much. And I wanted to thank each of you out there for being here today. We know you're here for our students, so your students. So thank you for just continuing to learn for them and adapt, for being educators. You know, that's what you do every day. We know how critical your work is. You are every day shaping our young learners. You're making them digital citizens and critical thinkers. And we wish you all the best in this year ahead. So, so stay strong. There's a lot of good out there, and there are a lot of folks you can lean on, as all of our panelists have attested to. So this is the last in our series of panel discussions for now. We really hope to be able to offer more of these kinds of virtual offerings in the future. We do have a lot more on our resource page, so be sure to check that out, columbiamuseum.org/learn. We've got virtual field trip offerings, we've got lesson plans and image sets you can download and adapt and work to meet the needs of your students. So I hope you'll continue to see us as a resource. We hope to be able to serve you as best we can. And so for now, I will just sign off from the Columbia Museum of Art. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.